The first time she said it, her voice didn't sound angry. It sounded broken, like something inside her had been quietly falling apart for a long time, and I was the last piece refusing to stay. Asterisk, why do you keep avoiding me? Asterisk, I froze with, my hands still on the car door, my breath caught somewhere between guilt and fear. I had been walking away again, just like I always did, but this time she had followed me. This time, she didn't let me disappear. Asterisk, before we go any further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of facing painful truths, take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe to the channel. And tell me in the comments, have you ever avoided someone because they reminded you of something you couldn't face? Asterisk, I wish I could say I was a brave person, but the truth is, I wasn't. Not when it came to this. Not when it came to her. Asterisk, her name was Margaret. She was my best friend's mother, or at least, she used to be. Asterisk, and the him she reminded me of was her son. My best friend. Brother I chose. The person who knew me better than anyone else ever could. His name was Caleb, and he was gone. Asterisk, it had been 8 months since the accident. But for me, time had stopped that night. Everything after felt like I was living someone else's life, moving through days that didn't belong to me. People said things like it gets easier and he would want you to move on, but none of that ever made sense. Because Caleb wasn't just someone I lost, it was a part of who I was. Asterisk, we grew up together in a quiet town in Ohio where nothing much ever changed. We played baseball in dusty fields, skipped school to sit by the lake, and made plans about leaving someday about building lives that were bigger than this place. Caleb had this way of making everything feel possible, like the world wasn't something to fear, but something to explore. Asterisk and Margaret. She was always there. Always smiling, always asking if we were hungry, always pretending not to notice when we tracked mud into the house. She treated me like I was her own son. There were nights I spent more time at their house than my own, sitting at their dinner table, laughing at stories, feeling like I belonged somewhere. But after Caleb died, that house became something else. Place filled with echoes. A place I couldn't bear to step into again. At first I told myself I was giving her space, that she needed time to grieve, to process everything. But the truth was, I was the one who couldn't face it. Because every time I saw her, every time I heard her voice, I didn't just see Margaret, I saw him, in her eyes, in her smile, in the way she said my name. Asterisk, it was like standing in front of a mirror that reflected everything. I had lost. Asterisk, so I stopped going over. I stopped answering her calls. I stopped responding to her messages. I told myself it was easier this way, that avoiding the pain meant I could somehow survive it. Asterisk. But grief doesn't work like that. It waits for you. And that day, in the parking lot outside the grocery store, finally caught up to me. Asterisk Margaret stood a few feet away, her hands trembling. Slightly, her eyes searching mine like she was trying to find something that had been missing for too long. She looked older than I remembered, like the weight of loss had pressed down on her in ways I couldn't even begin to understand. Asterisk. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. So instead I told her the truth. I told her that I avoided her because she reminded me of him. Asterisk. In the moment those words left my mouth, I knew how cruel they sounded. Asterisk, her face fell, not in anger, but in something far worse, understanding, and that made it hurt even more. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse me of abandoning her. She just nodded slowly, like she had already known, like she had been carrying that realization alone for months. Asterisk, then, she said something I'll never forget. She told me that she saw Caleb in me too, that every time she thought of her son, she thought of me, that I was part of his life, part of his happiness, part of the memory she clung to when everything felt too heavy to bear. Asterisk, she said, losing Caleb didn't just take her son away. It took a part of her world. When I disappeared, it felt like losing him all over again. I didn't know how to respond to that, because I had been so focused on my own pain, my own inability to cope, that I never stopped to think about hers. Asterisk grief had turned me inward, made me selfish in ways I didn't even realize. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about everything she said, about the empty space I had left behind, not just in my own life, but in hers. About how Caleb would have reacted if he could see me now, avoiding the very person who had always been there for both of us. Asterisk, and for the first time in months, I felt something shift. Asterisk, it wasn't relief. It wasn't peace. It was responsibility. The next morning, I drove to her house. I hadn't been there since the funeral. Everything looked the same. The porch, the garden, the old wind chime Caleb had fixed years ago, but it all felt different. Like I was stepping into a memory that had been frozen in time. Asterisk, my hand hovered over the door for what felt like forever before I finally knocked. Asterisk, when Margaret opened it. She looked surprised. Not just to see me, but to see that I had come back. Asterisk. Didn't have a speech prepared. I didn't have the right words. All I had was honesty. I told her I was sorry. Asterisk, sorry for disappearing. Sorry for not being there. Sorry for letting my fear keep me away from someone who needed me just as much as I needed them. Asterisk, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she stepped forward and hugged me. It wasn't a quick, polite hug. It was the kind that breaks something open inside you. It's the kind that says everything words can't. Asterisk. And just like that, the walls I had built around myself started to crack. Asterisk, from that day on, things didn't magically get better. Grief doesn't disappear overnight. There were still moments when the silence felt too loud, when memories hit too hard, when the absence of Caleb felt unbearable, but I stopped running from it. I started visiting Margaret regularly. Sometimes we talked about Caleb, about his laugh, his terrible jokes, the way he used to leave his shoes everywhere. Other times, we just sat in silence, sharing a space that didn't need to be filled with words. Asterisk, we began to heal, not by forgetting, but by remembering together. And slowly I realized something I hadn't before. Avoiding pain doesn't protect you from it. It only isolates you. Asterisk, but facing it, sharing it with someone who understands, can turn that pain into something else. Something lighter. Something that doesn't feel so impossible to carry. Asterisk, months later on a quiet afternoon, Margaret and I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, the kind of view Caleb used to love. Asterisk, and for the first time since he was gone, I didn't feel like I was drowning in his absence. I felt like he was still there, not in a way that erased the loss, but in a way that reminded me that love doesn't disappear. It changes, it lingers. It finds new ways to exist. Asterisk, Margaret smiled softly, her eyes reflecting the fading light. And I realized something simple but powerful. Asterisk, we hadn't lost him completely. We had lost his presence. But not his impact, not his memory, not the part of him that lived on in both of us. Asterisk, before we reach the end, I want to ask you something special. Drop a comment right now and tell me the name of someone you miss. Let's remember them together. Asterisk, and if this story touched your heart, if it reminded you of someone you've lost or someone you've been avoiding because it hurts too much, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps. These stories reach people who need them the most. Asterisk, because sometimes the hardest thing to do is also the most important. Asterisk, and sometimes the people we avoid are the ones who can help us heal. Asterisk, I looked at Margaret that evening, really looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't just see the pain. I saw strength. I saw love. Asterisk, I saw a connection that had been there all along, waiting for me to come back. Asterisk, and quietly, in my heart, I thanked Caleb.